The GDPR deadline is fast approaching. Is your business ready to put the consumer in control of their data? I'm Tanya Hall for ZDNet, and joining me is Danielle Liss. She is a partner at #Legal. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So what is #Legal known for?
We do a lot in the online entrepreneurial space and a lot for influencer marketing professionals. So we try to make legal a little bit more accessible for those who are living in the digital world, because I think legal gets kind of a bad rap sometimes for being behind the times, if you will.
It's so true. So GDPR is the big conversation right now. What effect will GDPR have on American companies?
For GDPR with American companies, I think that we're going to start to see, I think we're already starting to see a ton of people who are really taking a better look at what data they're collecting, how they're collecting it, how they're using it, and most importantly, being upfront with the consumers as to what is happening with their data. So in terms of how US companies are responding, we are seeing a ton of changes to privacy policies, changes to websites, adding overlays to let people know, we're collecting information through cookies or whatever the case might be, pixels. So we're seeing a lot of changes there. So US companies can be upfront with their EU readers or the people who are in the EU at the time who are accessing the site so that they know exactly how their information is being used.
There seems to be a lot of confusion around what is personal data. So, for example, is an IP address count as personal data?
It does. An IP address, one thing that kind of blew me away when I heard it was your physical features can be personal information. So if you think about every time you've been tagged in one of those random Facebook photos and you're like, that's not me. And so it's your features can also be a part of your personal information. So anything that can be used to identify you or used in combination with other data to identify you. So your IP address, your location, your features, things like that will also be considered personal data.
I buy a lot of products online, and I use contact forms for that. So is something like a contact form that simple? Is that also considered personal data?
Absolutely. Well, yes, because you're likely on a contact form submitting that with a way for them to reach out to you because you want to be contacted back, right? So if you're giving them your name or your email address, then yes, that would fall under the realm of personal data. And you would simply need to let them know, here's where we store it, here's how we use it. Are you sharing it with any other third parties who are potentially doing any processing for you?
All right. You mentioned pictures, and I'm tagged, as many of us are, in pictures all the time. So what about content that users share with you on your Facebook page or other social media platforms?
Typically, when it comes to the social media platforms, we're going to refer you to whatever terms that particular platform has. Check and see, because when it comes to GDPR, they should be defaulting to stricter privacy settings, but always take a look and see what your privacy settings say. So that way, if there is data that can potentially be shared, you are in control of that. This is one of the goals of GDPR, is really about putting consumers in control of what is happening with their data, how it's being controlled, stored, used, etc.
And third-party service providers like MailChimp or SurveyMonkey, do we need to be concerned about what they're doing?
Yes, definitely. If you're a data controller and you're working with somebody who is a processor, so like your email service provider or SurveyMonkey, someone who is providing something for you, definitely find out from them how they are processing. See if you need to enter into a data processing addendum to your contract, and really learn what it is you need to do, because MailChimp's a fantastic example. They have been incredibly responsive. They are putting together a lot of tools. So take a look at what those tools are, because even though the tools are there, you may still have to do something to make sure your company personally is going to be compliant as well.
And how does GDPR actually affect influencers? What do they need to know?
For influencers, it's a really interesting mix, because there are a lot of influencers are doing email lists, so they would need to get consent from anybody in the EU who is on their email list, but also there's a lot of tracking that happens. So for example, for influencers who are doing sponsored content, if there's tracking pixels involved, they may need to be disclosing if it's tracking personal information.
Larger companies might choose to appoint a data protection officer. What do you suggest for smaller businesses who don't have the budget to add on a data protection official in their organization?
Step one, audit. make sure you know what you're collecting and how it's being used. And if you find things that you don't need, there's tools that you may have installed and then never touched again, get rid of it because you don't need to have that extra data. And then make sure you've got your privacy policy updated. Make sure that you have the right tools. So if you need to install a plugin on your website, just get those into place so that you can be sure you're compliant.
What are some of the software tools that you'd recommend? You mentioned plugins. Are there some that are specifically important to help with the GDPR compliance?
It depends on what you need. I really like the plugin. It's actually just called GDPR. And they give you a lot of different tools where you can do the overlays for cookies. You can get the lists for right to delete, right to access the data, right to be forgotten. So that's a plugin that we have. So far, we really like it. I have a feeling that we are going to see a lot of innovation in this area with a lot of different tools being offered. So my recommendation for people is find the one that makes the most sense for you, that you feel comfortable with, and then go ahead and move forward with that one.
A couple of years ago, there was an EU cookie law that didn't really impact American companies. How is GDPR different?
This one is different because the territorial scope was specifically expanded. So the EU cookie law was basically meant for EU companies who were heavily using people in the EU. The territorial scope for GDPR has been expanded, so it is beyond just EU companies who are kind of in the EU. This one is really looking at anybody who is targeting and collecting data from someone in the EU or from someone who is monitoring behavior. So the scope is much broader than it was.
There are a lot of companies that feel like they don't need to pay attention to GDPR and they're not really worried about consequences. So, what process would the EU have to follow to start a cause of action against an American company that has no physical presence in the EU? I mean, would it be enforceable?
It should be enforceable, and it's going to be interesting. Once everything goes into effect, we'll really start to see more about how they are planning to enforce and what they're going to do with US companies. But typically, if you are targeting or monitoring people who are in the EU, you're essentially availing yourself of that jurisdiction and any treaties that would allow us to prosecute here for any fines, things of that nature. So we recommend people, even if you are a US company with no physical presence there, make sure you're cautious because as far as we're concerned, no one wants to be first. No one wants to be the example that they are finding for that US company. So the compliance doesn't have to be that hard. So definitely try to make sure that your company is compliant.
What can we expect maybe in the future here in the United States? Can we expect maybe state or federal regulations similar to GDPR to happen here?
I think we will. I don't know if we'll see it on a federal level quite soon. I don't know that we'll see it very soon, but I do think we will see it on a state level. For example, California is the only state that currently mandates privacy policies. If I was going to bet, I would say to expect something very similar from California, most likely, but I wouldn't be surprised if other states start enacting things. I think we've had so many headlines really about data and how it's used. And I think as people become more aware, they're really going to start demanding that there's more action taken by their legislators.
Danielle Liss, thank you so much for your time. It's important that people do pay attention to what's happening and they keep their business safe. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about, how to help protect themselves or maybe about some of the offerings that you have on your website or the work that you do, how can they do that?
They can find us at hashtag-legal.com and we'd love to connect.
Thanks again, Danielle. And if you want to connect with me, you can. You can find more of my interviews right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe go to my website. I'm at tanyahall.net. I have links to all my social platforms on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. In fact, if you'd like to chat, I'd love it if you followed me on Twitter at Tanya Hall Radio. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.